Farage opens the door to Rupert Lowe, and a united right could transform British politics. A Farage-Lowe deal could turn Britain's fragmented right into a government in waiting. Nigel Farage's openness to working with Rupert Lowe has raised the possibility that Britain's two insurgent parties could stop competing for the same voters and begin constructing a wider movement capable of challenging for power. The prospect remains far from a formal merger. Farage and Lowe are already disputing what has been said privately, what contact has taken place, and who has responded to whom. Yet the political significance lies less in the personal drama than in the admission beneath it. Neither Reform UK nor Restore Britain can safely ignore the other. Lowe has publicly proposed cooperation between what he calls the patriotic right, offering to put previous disagreements aside if Reform accepts a series of hardline policy commitments. Farage has indicated that he is open in principle to bringing together voters who share Reform's broad outlook, although he has stopped well short of accepting Lowe's conditions or promising an electoral pact. This is therefore not yet a merger. It is the beginning of a negotiation over who controls Britain's rapidly expanding anti-establishment right, and what that movement would ultimately stand for. Two parties fighting for one political audience. Reform UK remains the dominant force. The latest YouGov voting intentions survey, conducted on 26th and the 27th of July, placed Reform on 22%, level with Labour, and narrowly ahead of the Conservatives on 21%. That leaves Farage's party firmly inside a competitive three-party contest, rather than operating as a marginal protest movement. Restore Britain is considerably smaller, but its importance cannot be measured by its national percentage alone. Polling that explicitly includes Restore has generally placed the party in the low to mid-single digits, although some surveys have recorded support as high as 7%. A Find Out Now poll in March gave Restore 7%, while finding that its presence appeared to reduce Reform's support. Under proportional representation, that might simply produce two separate parties with their own parliamentary blocs. Britain does not use proportional representation for Westminster elections. It uses first past the post, where the candidate with the most votes in each constituency wins, even when most voters supported somebody else. That means a party polling at 4 or 5% nationally may win few seats of its own, while still changing the winner in dozens of constituencies. Restore does not need to overtake Reform to damage it. It needs only to draw away several thousand voters in marginal seats. Electoral calculus has modeled a scenario in which removing Restore from the contest could add roughly 70 seats to Reform's projected total, potentially leaving Farage within reach of leading a minority government. That is a model rather than a forecast, and its outcome depends heavily on assumptions about voter transfers, constituency distribution, and future polling. But it demonstrates the scale of the danger created by fragmentation. The argument for cooperation is therefore brutally simple. Divided, the two parties could allow Labour or the Conservatives to win seats neither commands majority support in. Combined, they could turn a substantial national vote into parliamentary power. Their supporters already look like political relatives. The overlap between Reform and Restore is unusually pronounced. YouGov's major 2026 voter study found that 90% of Restore supporters consider immigration one of Britain's most important issues. Among Reform supporters, the equivalent figure was 86%. In both groups, immigration outranked every other issue by a considerable margin. Their voters also appear comfortable with one another's political vehicles. YouGov found that 79% of people with a favorable opinion of Restore also viewed Reform favorably. Meanwhile, 52% of those favorable towards Reform also had a positive opinion of Restore. Those figures suggest that this is not primarily a conflict between two incompatible electorates. It is a conflict between organizations, personalities, and competing theories of how power should be pursued. Reform presents itself as a party capable of replacing the Conservatives and ultimately entering government. That requires broadening its coalition beyond highly engaged immigration voters and convincing people concerned about taxation, public services, housing, wages, and competent administration. Restore is less constrained by the need to appear immediately ready for government. Its published identity emphasizes secure borders, small government, low taxation, national pride, traditional Christian principles, free speech, and direct democracy. That allows Lowe to articulate positions Farage may regard as electorally dangerous, strategically premature, or too restrictive for a national coalition. Yet it also gives Restore leverage. Lowe can claim to represent voters who believe reform has become too cautious, too centralized, or too willing to soften its program in pursuit of respectability. The two parties are not separated by an ideological gulf. They are separated by an argument about intensity, leadership, and trust. Lowe's offer comes with a price. Lowe's proposed cooperation is not an unconditional peace offer. Reported demands include large-scale deportations of people without legal status, fundamental immigration reform, prohibitions concerning the burqa and aspects of halal, slaughter, a referendum on restoring the death penalty, reductions in welfare dependency, and restrictions on former conservative ministers entering a future joint administration. Some of those ideas would be popular among sections of both parties' memberships. Others would give Labor, the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, and parts of the Conservative Party an opportunity to portray a joint movement as extreme. That is the central strategic dilemma for Farage. A deal could recover voters currently moving to Restore and prevent damaging constituency-level splits. But adopting every Restore condition could reduce reform's appeal among softer conservative defectors, economically anxious former Labor voters, and people who support tighter borders without embracing Restore's complete program. Farage's task is not simply to unite everyone to his right. It is to assemble a coalition large enough to win. Lowe's task is different. Restore must prove that it is more than an online pressure movement, and that it can convert attention into candidates, local organization, and durable votes. Its challenge has always been turning momentum into machinery, a transition examined in Restore Britain's move from movement to national party. A pact could solve problems for both men. It could give Farage access to Restore's activists and remove an electoral spoiler. It could give Lowe influence over a movement with a realistic route to Westminster power. But it would also force them to settle the hardest question: who ultimately leads? Why a deal could benefit the right. The strongest case for cooperation is that Britain's political right is already badly fragmented. Reform, Restore, and the Conservatives are competing for overlapping groups of voters, while Labour, despite its own divisions, can benefit from that split. The result may be constituencies where right-leaning candidates collectively attract a clear majority, but Labour wins because that majority is divided three ways. A formal merger is not the only solution. The parties could negotiate a limited non-aggression agreement in selected seats. Restore might avoid contesting constituencies where Reform has the strongest local operation, while Reform could stand aside for credible Restore candidates in a small number of areas where Lowe's organization has demonstrated genuine strength. They could also cooperate on policy campaigns, voter registration, local government scrutiny, and opposition to electoral reforms they regard as harmful, without combining their memberships or leadership structures. That would resemble an electoral alliance more than a conventional merger. Done intelligently, such an arrangement could reduce wasted votes in marginal constituencies, strengthen local campaigning networks, prevent public feuds from dominating the right's media coverage, combine Farage's national recognition with Lowe's appeal among hardline activists, accelerate candidate recruitment and policy development, present voters with a clearer alternative to Labour and the Conservatives. It would also allow both organizations to preserve some independence, while testing whether their supporters actually cooperate on the ground. That matters, because voter transfer cannot be assumed. Some Restore supporters may refuse to back Reform under Farage. Some Reform voters may view Restore as too uncompromising. Political leaders can sign agreements, but they cannot order every voter to follow them. The Conservatives would face the greatest immediate danger. A Reform-Restore understanding would intensify the existential pressure on the Conservative Party. The Conservatives currently sit only 1 point behind Reform and Labour in YouGov's latest survey. That means they remain competitive nationally. But they are vulnerable on their right flank, especially if Reform can reassure voters that supporting Farage will not simply divide the opposition and hand Labour another term. For years, the Conservatives benefited from an implicit argument, however dissatisfied right-leaning voters became. Only the Tory candidate could realistically defeat Labour. That argument weakens when Reform leads or matches the Conservatives nationally. It becomes even weaker if Restore stops competing against Reform and directs its activists towards defeating incumbent Conservative MPs. The Conservatives would then face three difficult choices. They could move rightwards on immigration, crime, and cultural issues in an attempt to recover Reform and restore voters. They could reposition themselves as the moderate center-right alternative to a more radical alliance. Or they could attempt local tactical arrangements of their own. Each option carries costs. Moving right could alienate liberal and professional voters. Moving towards the center could surrender more territory to Farage. Electoral cooperation would require accepting that the Conservatives are no longer automatically the senior force on the British right. A Farage-Lowe deal would therefore do more than combine two insurgent parties. It could accelerate the replacement of the Conservatives as the main vehicle of right-of-center politics. Labour would gain a clearer enemy and a bigger threat. Labour would initially welcome some elements of the arrangement. Lowe's harder policies would give Labour powerful material for a campaign based on moderation, stability, and warnings about radical government. A combined movement would be easier to frame as a single ideological threat than two separate parties with different public identities. But Labour would also lose one of its largest electoral advantages, division among its opponents. The party has recently recovered ground, following Andy Burnham's arrival as Prime Minister. Reuters reported Labour leads in some polls, while YouGov recorded a 22-22 tie with Reform. That recovery shows how quickly political momentum can change. A united Reform-Restore operation could force Labour to fight simultaneously on immigration, living standards, national identity, and institutional trust. It would also increase pressure in constituencies where Labour's traditional working-class coalition has already fractured. Britain's old party map is already breaking apart, as demonstrated by the rise of Reform, the Greens, Independents, and smaller movements. A pact on the right would make that realignment more organized and potentially more dangerous to the established parties, part of the wider instability examined in Labour's struggle with Britain's emerging multi-party system. The personal rift remains the greatest obstacle. The electoral logic of cooperation is stronger than the personal relationship between the two leaders. Lowe's departure from Reform followed allegations concerning his conduct, which he denied, and a bitter public breakdown in relations with the party leadership. The dispute created separate networks of loyalty and deep suspicion among activists. Those tensions have not disappeared. On the 3rd of August, Lowe accused Farage of outright lying about their communications while still maintaining that Restore's offer remained open. Farage's account was that he had approached the question with an open mind, but had not received the response he expected. That exchange demonstrates why a complete organizational merger would be difficult. Who controls candidate selection? Who writes the manifesto? What happens to Reform officials whom Restore distrusts? Would Lowe accept Farage as the undisputed leader? Would Farage permit an internal power center capable of challenging him? Unless those questions are answered, talk of unity may remain a mechanism for each side to blame the other for continued division. A merger is not necessary for a political earthquake. The most likely immediate outcome is not the dissolution of Restore into Reform or the creation of an entirely new party. A narrower agreement is more plausible: selective stand-asides, shared campaigning on immigration and national sovereignty, or negotiations designed to prevent destructive contests in target constituencies. Even that could materially change the next election. Britain's electoral system magnifies relatively small changes in vote distribution. Restore's national support may look modest beside Reform's, but concentrated tactical cooperation could determine who wins dozens of marginal seats. That is why Farage's openness matters. It signals that Restore has become too significant to dismiss, while Lowe's offer acknowledges that Reform remains the only insurgent party currently polling at a level consistent with national power. The pro-unity case is compelling. Two parties drawing from the same political family should not hand victories to opponents because their leaders cannot settle past grievances. But successful unity would require discipline, rather than a simple photograph or joint declaration. It would need an agreed policy floor, a credible process for selecting candidates, boundaries between the organizations, and a clear answer on leadership. If they achieve that, the impact could be profound. Reform would become harder to dismiss as a divided protest movement. Restore would gain a pathway from online enthusiasm to parliamentary influence. The Conservatives could be squeezed out of their historic role. Labour would face a consolidated opponent rather than a fractured rebellion. The question is no longer whether Farage and Lowe share enough political ground to cooperate. It is whether either man is willing to sacrifice enough personal control to make cooperation real.